recording. And so, to my knowledge, it's recording as though there's someone watching, and I don't see myself, but you all see me, right? Like as the big
Yeah.
face. Okay.
We do.
Yeah.
We're definitely editing that out. And 3, 2, 1. Hi there, I'm Devonair from Cockroach Labs, and you're joining us for our first ever webcast, where our entire recruiting team is going to be talking about some of the different things that you can and should look for when you're looking for work in tough times. And some of the things we're going to be going through today is, what we do know and how much we can know, how you can lean into and connect with people to get more information about different roles and companies, where you can look to make the most educated guess about where those companies are going to be in the near and far off future, and how to best prepare for this new environment where we're interviewing completely differently and engaging with whole companies in a different way. And so I'm going to hand it off to the rest of the team to introduce themselves. Megan, would you mind starting?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dev. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm a recruiter here at Cockroach Labs. I focus on marketing, product, and then some. I'm in the process of transitioning over our sales hiring over into Ashley. So Ashley, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Marshall, and I'll be focused on sales, pre-sales, support engineering, and customer experience.
Dave?
Hey, I'm Dave Delaney. I'm the Senior Manager of Recruiting here at Cockroach Labs. Also used to do still do some of our engineering recruiting as well. So I manage the team and then also still work on some of the leadership roles. And was recently, Ben, who will introduce himself next, took over most of the technology hiring.
Hello, Ben Schumer. As Dave mentioned, managing most of the tech hiring for Cockroach Labs right now. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much. I have to say, if I snicker or smile a lot during this, it's because this format is a lot of fun for me. So the first topic we're going to be covering today is what companies are doing in a time like this. What with the pandemic and everyone being remote, what are they doing to stay safe and stay hiring? And I guess the first question to touch upon there is hiring going to stop, particularly in the tech industry? And Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts first on this.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I know it's on a lot of people's minds right now. Speaking for us, we're certainly still going to continue hiring. I think one of the things that we looked at was stopping and just really looking at what our goals were for the year and what was crucial and what we really wanted to accomplish. And the interesting thing was we had very, very aggressive goals coming into this year. We're looking to nearly double this year in terms of across the company, with a lot of hiring and engineering and revenue and even across all the other orgs. So, with that, especially front loaded in the first half of the year, really sitting down with the executive group and the different teams and figuring out, okay, well, where do we really have crucial hires that must have to happen now to get to the goals that we want to and continue to support our customers and continue to do product development. So we are still hiring. We've definitely scaled back some of that across different positions. And some companies will choose to stop and see where things sort of balance out and normalize a bit. I think other companies are still forging ahead pretty strongly with their hiring goals. And unfortunately, some will probably have layoffs as well, just depending on the organization and how they're doing with things. But for us, definitely something where we are scaling back a bit, but still growing at a pretty comfortable pace and looking to add some new people in the coming months.
You heard it here first, folks. We're still hiring. Thanks, Ben. And Ashley, Ashley joined the team relatively recently and has recruited at a number of organizations, particularly with a focus on sales. And so you've seen this from a different angle. We, as mostly technical recruiters, are used to always needing engineers. Does that change when you're looking at the sales equation?
Yeah, I think not. I actually think this is a great opportunity for salespeople in the industry to take a moment, think about, where they want to be, right? Even some top sales talent are going to find that challenges related to this current time might affect their ability to hit their targets. So this could be that, one opportunity for them to look and see where they want to be in the long term. Is their industry sticky? Are they selling a product that customers still need right now? It might answer some long-term questions for them about what they want to be doing. And this is a great time to reconnect with your former managers, your former teammates, find out what they're doing right now. What companies are they working for? And are those companies growing in this time or retracting? I think it's a really good time for some self-exploration in terms of what you want to do in the long term.
That's great. That's very interesting to hear. I'm learning something too right now. And some of the things that we're doing as a company, we went work from home pretty much for the most part as a whole company just about a month ago now. And immediately we switched to remote interviewing and had to tread new waters. Picked up a virtual whiteboarding tool called, what is it called, Ben?
Freehand. It's a tool by Envision.
Freehand, and it seems to be working pretty well so far. And so if you haven't found a solution yet for that sort of thing, that's one. And we changed a few things. We can't take candidates to lunch, unfortunately. So we give them the option of doing a half-hour coffee chat with a member of our team, or having that hour in between interviews that we usually allocate for lunch to recharge and pivot towards their next bit of interviewing. Other things we do are conducting virtual check-ins before and at the end of on-sites. And these are just some pretty, unique things for us, as all of us are used to being able to just hand off welcoming and walking candidates out. And this is definitely something really new and in many ways unusual, but you find that there's some light in that you can do this in the future when the need arises. And we'll get more into thinking about remote interviewing in a bit, but we're definitely doing that and looking for other ways to reach people. This being one of those avenues, because we're not stopping hiring, and we want to make sure that we can communicate how we're thinking about this, and maybe even add a perspective that's helpful for other people. So topic 2 is what to look for. And so we'll be running through a couple of things here. And, we again are making educated guesses, sort of postulating and thinking through what we know as folks who have been through these sort of processes before, and what we look for among the different companies that our candidates are going to. And so first on the list are things like funding and open roles. And I'm wondering, Ben, if you have any thoughts here in terms of what we can look for if we're looking for places to apply.
Yeah, thanks, Dev. I mean, like you said, I think it's important to preface anything we say with, we're making educated guess here. I think that historically speaking, when you see a company with a lot of open roles or a lot of funding, maybe they're even profitable, those are all usually good signs that it's a healthy company that should be stable and a good place for you to have conversations with and learn more about and interview. I think that right now, with the uncertainty brought on by COVID-19, it's probably worth doing like an extra layer of due diligence right now. I think that in normal times, you can just kind of take a quick glance at maybe the company's Crunchbase page or something to get a sense of how they were doing financially, how big they were. But I think that now it's probably smart to, if you know people at the company or people who work, friends of friends, whatever it is, learn what you can about the company's current state from people inside. And obviously when you have your interview, if you interview or talk to a recruiter, ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to dig in and show that you care about what's going on. You want to know how the company's doing.
That's great.
I would also just add to that one thing. I think it's also important to just scrape the network of people that work there. So to Ben's point, of course, reach out to people that you know that might work there, but also maybe you're interviewing for a product manager role. Reach out to some other PMs at the company, see what their experience has been, get their insight into, how stable do they feel, how confident in the company do they feel, because more times than not, people will be super excited and eager to talk to you. So it's certainly worth going that extra step to reach out to learn, but also to also show that you're interested in the company too. And that's also a great way to make an intro to the company.
That's great. Thank you. And, for those of us who might have never, done cold outreach on LinkedIn and tried to, connect with people who we don't know at all, do you have any advice for how to broach that conversation?
Me?
Yeah.
I would just broach it in the way just that you have applied or you're interested in applying for, I'll go with the product manager one that I mentioned, the open PM role at XYZ company. Would love to hop on a Zoom call or a Google Hangout to learn a little bit more about their experience at the company. I did that when I was interviewing at Cockroach, and I spoke to Nathan, who's one of our amazing engineers, because we went to the same college. And I think just showing that you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit really speaks volumes to how much you want the job as well. And it also just, again, gives you that insider's look into the role. So short and sweet, LinkedIn certainly is a great tool for that. So just reach out and say, would love to learn more, and I'm sure you'll hear back from people.
That's great. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Do you mind if I hop into? Awesome. Just to Megan's point too, she made a great, I think, mention about Nathan, and that her personal example is, I tell people, try to find something in common, whether it's a school or a club or a meetup that you're both a part of or whatever it might be. I think people in general, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Most people want to help others out where they can. Especially if there's something that ties you to them. I've definitely had people that have reached out to me. And in fact, at my last company, ended up working with someone that I actually reached out to them, but it could work on the flip side where I was like, hey, we went to the same school. We didn't cross, the same years, but are you interested in just chatting and just, hearing about what we're doing? I think that's a great way to go about it. And the other thing I always tell people is like, what's the worst thing that can possibly happen from you reaching out? Is either you'll get a conversation, they'll politely decline, or you just won't hear back because there's so much going on. There's, they're busy. Who knows what's going on with their lives? They may just not get back to you. And quite frankly, that's really the worst case scenario. I mean, I suppose there's potentially someone could respond rudely or whatever it might be, but I think also that probably tells you a little bit something about that team and that company as well, if that's sort of the way that they respond to a very casual outreach. So you don't really have a lot to lose in this circumstance, other than like somebody might say like, hey, I'm super busy right now, things are kind of crazy, I can't chat, but maybe in like 6 months. Or you get a conversation with somebody who can tell you some great information, and now you've got your foot in the door there. So I know it's kind of intimidating for people when they first start doing it, but I think the more you do it too, the more comfortable you get with it, the easier it seems, and you realize it's really not that big of a deal, especially if you sort of put yourself in their shoes and think like, well, all right, well, if somebody reached out to me and just wanted to learn more about like this awesome place that I work, it's kind of a cool thing. So I think it becomes much bigger when you're doing it yourself. But if you just kind of remember that, like, if you're on the other end, chances are you'd probably help that person out, or at least respond to them, or at least not be rude to them in that way. So that's what I always try to tell people, especially when I was doing like a lot of the campus stuff early on in my career, is there's only really good that can come from it. It can only kind of give you a good opportunity, or you're in the same spot that you were before. So it's worth taking that extra step. Also, a lot of people don't take that extra effort. A lot of people just toss their resumes onto a career site, and then they think that they've done everything they can. And quite frankly, that's probably about the bare minimum that you can do. There's so many other channels that you can approach folks. So I think just keeping that in mind is helpful as well.
That's all really helpful. I think that, one of the key takeaways here for me, at least, is that humans be human, and you should feel comfortable with the ambiguity, with the possibility that, maybe someone doesn't get back to you, but at the end of the day, you made the effort. And that's a huge part of, what we're going over today is making the effort to research and take a look at some of the more nuanced bits of information that'll help you decide if you are looking where you should look. And a couple of things to note there. I mentioned a number of open roles, and that is one of those things that could go either way. Maybe the company hasn't had time to adjust some of its job listings, or maybe they're just keeping those open in spite of their uncertainty. But it could also be that they've made some really thoughtful decisions about which to keep up, which to post. And so this is sort of an imperfect metric, but if you want to try and take a look at when a job was posted, usually LinkedIn will have a little piece of information telling you how recently or how long ago something was posted. And if it happened in the last week or so, you can guess that they probably meant to put it up. Other things that I want to get to in terms of industry and product are things like industry stickiness and the stage of a company's growth and product development. And Ben, you talked a bit to that in terms of the company's growth stage, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, any of you, on what you'd think of as some sticky industries, that is, those that will remain in business even in hard times because of how sort of ingrained their products or fields are. Ashley, you want to take a crack at it?
Sure, I'll start. Well, we are all envisioning Charmin in our head right now with everything that's happening. But of course, there are so many, whether it's tech industry or not, that are finding a way to be successful, or potentially some that are, I think that one of the great measure of whether a company is going to be successful is, can they adapt? So it's great to see what's happening right now. What are they doing? If their product for some reason isn't in demand anymore, are they changing? Are they moving to a new way of delivering service to their customers? Have they been able to shift to a remote workforce and they're still able to be successful? Are they meeting the needs of the customers that we have? So when you're looking and considering a company, you can ask all of those questions and see what's happening. And of course, some things are super critical. Companies need databases. That's very beneficial for us, and they're not going to likely change their database in the middle of this situation. So I think, situations like that are super positive, and infrastructure technology is going to be there. And maybe some application technology is also just as critical. I think about all of the HR people that are administrating all of the changes to work from home and how that could be beneficial to that industry right now. So I guess every company may or may not thrive. It really depends on, are they able to adapt? Are they able to change and meet the demands of the current climate? And what will this mean for them when we come out of this situation? And, each of us can kind of assess that individually.
Yeah, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think that if you're out looking for a job right now, it is important to kind of think about how the industry could be doing. And all we can do is kind of speculate and make our best guess. But I think that something else you can do to kind of learn about a particular industry is just, like we were saying before, reach out to people who work within it, find out firsthand what is happening, and just to get a better sense of like what's happening now, what could be happening 3 months from now, a year from now. It's kind of an uncharted time for a lot of us, or really all of us. So I think, what you're going to be hearing a lot today as we talk about these different topics is what's true today may not be true tomorrow or next week. So that means that a company doing well right now maybe won't be next week, or vice versa. So I think it's just important to kind of do your own homework, use your best judgment, and really think what is important to you as you look for a job.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I also think, asking questions about the roadmap is really important too, because every roadmap will likely have shifted. The new normal is significantly different than it was 3 weeks ago. So you want to both Ben and Ashley's point, you do want to make sure that the company is taking all of the what is the new normal into account, right? We need to be shifting our plan for the next 6 months, a year, however long this may last. But you want to know that the company is really evolving as the rest of the world is, and if they're not, then it's probably a strong signal that perhaps they're not iterating in the way that they need to in order to keep up with the changes that are happening.
That's something that I hadn't even thought about. The product roadmap, I think, is a subject best suited for a product recruiter to chat about. So thank you for that. In terms of what you should be asking yourself, which is something that both Ben and Megan have alluded to, we'll wrap with that. And I definitely do want to spend some time on what you should be prepared to ask your recruiters, maybe your potential future manager, and even yourself. But before that, we're going to pivot just a little bit and talk about how you prep for this new kind of interview. And this is something that is new for all of us. I know I've never done a virtual interview before, and so maybe there are a lot of us out there that haven't as well. And I'd just like to start with the basics. I myself, the first thing that comes to mind for my candidates is letting them know that it's okay if it's a little bit awkward at first, because this is uncharted territory, such that your interviewers likely prefer to be in person, and maybe you would too. But the feeling is mutual. And going back to all of us being human, it's just important to know that what's weird and new and a bit uncomfortable for you is also that for the other person. And even being very forthright about that and expressing that this is a new format can be helpful in terms of setting expectations and creating an environment of openness in interviewing. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that part, the sort of ambiguity and getting into the mode of video interviewing?
Yeah, I think you made a good point about that, Devin, about leaning into, I think you said leaning into the awkwardness, which I think that's a great way of thinking about it. It's because it's on both sides. It's on the candidate side and the team side, the interviewer side, to make it as normal as possible while acknowledging that it's not going to be normal. I think that's kind of the way that I think about it. But I also, think that people should not get too caught up in that as well. Like, I think it's good to acknowledge by saying like, hey, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, or this is the first one for me, but then also not letting yourself get stuck in that, and to keep coming back to that. Like, I think maybe kind of get it out of your system, and then you sort of push forward and recognize that, like, look, everyone's in the same boat. We're doing the best that we can here. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind too, is like, acknowledge it and then move on. Then lean into it, but then really push forward. The other thing is, I think, even from a practical standpoint, try practicing it. Like, maybe you don't do a full 4-hour interview, but see if a friend or someone will sit down and just go through a video chat with you and like ask you some questions, and just start feeling more normal, seeing yourself on the screen and hearing yourself talk out loud. And then you'll feel like, try the link, ask the recruiter if they can send over like what they'll be using beforehand, so you can get comfortable with it if you're not. Just all these little things that then, if you log on a minute before the interview is supposed to start and you're scrambling around to find things, you'll get flustered. You're gonna probably be more stressed than you want to be going into it. So give yourself some time to prepare, to practice, to make it feel a little bit more normal, because it's all repetition. I have done a virtual interview and it did not go very well. And I think part of it was partially because I didn't prepare as much as I probably should have. I expected it was just going to be the same. And I'm a recruiter, so I've been through lots of interviews. I didn't think much of it, but it is very, very different in that format. A lot's the same, but it's lots different. And I think even just, spending some time beforehand, just being on a hangout with a friend and just answering some questions would have just made me feel a little bit more comfortable going into it. So that's something I think can really, it's not a huge amount of effort, but I think the impact and the benefits you'll get from it far outweigh the time you'd put into it by just spending a little bit of time getting comfortable with the technology and hearing yourself talk to a screen and all these things that go with it. So those are just some things that have come to mind that I've talked to candidates about.
I also think it's important to note that like say your Wi-Fi goes out, that's okay. Everyone, that will not be held against you. You know, there's going to be so many, like right now, I couldn't get my Wi-Fi to work in my living room, so I'm leaning against the bathroom wall. And that's just where the Wi-Fi was working. Those things will happen, and that's totally fine. You know, we are all human. We are all working our way through this, and we have internal calls all the time that drop off perhaps, or someone is on mute or whatever it may be. Those are all, that's all part of it, and that's totally fine. You just have to do what you can to come prepared, to Dave's point. And I think a good way to do that also is to, maybe you're doing a presentation, or maybe you're you know, doing some sort of brainstorming session that you would usually be able to communicate, you know, really well in person, but maybe there's something that's lost in communication when you're over video chat. So instead of just trying to, you know, do your best on the camera, maybe prepare some slides, you know, bring some slides that allow you to feel more confident going into the conversation than just trying to articulate yourself on a tiny little screen. You know, I know Ben's been using a really great tool for whiteboarding, as Debonair mentioned, and Ben, if there's anything you want to share around that, it could be interesting for people, but that seems to be working quite well. But I think it is, you have to almost, in this online setting, you have to prepare even more than you would have if you had done it in person, because you really do remove a lot of the normal kind of human interaction.
Yeah. Megan, to your point, I think when we had to switch to doing remote engineering interviews, I was a little bit fearful that losing the whiteboard was going to be a really tough thing to adapt to. But we were fortunate enough to find a tool pretty quickly that was created a digital whiteboard that was easy to use for both the candidates and interviewers. And all I really did was I gave candidates a heads up. Like, let them know what tools they're going to be using, so they can, you know, practice at home, open up the programs, get comfortable, see how it's going to work, and let them just sort of, you know, like Dave was saying, practice a little bit. Like, make sure that when you go in there and start your interview, that you're not kind of caught surprised at how something is working or not working the way you're expecting it to. But yeah, I think as long as you prepare and make yourself comfortable and lean into the awkwardness, all will be okay.
Yeah, Ben, you made me think of something there too, talking about the fact that you give candidates a heads up about what we'll be using, and I think we try to be really good about that, about being forthcoming with this information to candidates. But it made me think too that with everything going on, like, we're affected just the same as any other team. You know, if a recruiter may forget to tell you or to send you something, like, be your own advocate too. If you feel like there's something missing or would be helpful for you to feel comfortable, it's in everyone's best interest for these interviews to go well, the recruiter, the team, the candidate. So if there's something that you think would help you feel more comfortable or be effective or efficient in the interview process, ask your recruiter. Like, reach out to them and say, like, hey, I just want to make sure I'm coming into this as prepared as possible. Is there a tool, or is there something I can prep for this, or is there a slide deck I can put together to present that I can share with the team? And again, we're trying to be as proactive as possible, but if, you know, that's not something that comes up in your conversation, definitely, you know, don't be afraid to reach out, because the recruiter is going to be happy, one, that you're super engaged, and two, that means you're probably going to do better in the process, which is just a win for everybody. So it just made me think of it, because Ben's doing a great job with our candidates, as we're all trying to do here. But feel free, and I encourage you, if you don't get all that information, or you think there's other things that could be helpful, definitely ask the recruiter, or even if there's something that you think you can suggest to them. Like, I think, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but freehand was actually kind of came up in a conversation with a candidate at one point, and that's sort of how we sort of started looking into it and piloting it and playing around with it a bit internally. So everyone's kind of in the same boat, like we've been talking about, and we don't know all the answers or know all the tools that are out there. And in fact, we love when candidates suggest it, because then we know that they're going to be comfortable coming in using it. So just a couple things that popped into my head there about that.
And one more thing to request, I think, is really important if they're not already doing this, but something that on our end has been really useful for candidates is that every interview, so we do 4 rounds or 4 1-hour interviews, every interview uses the same Google Hangouts link or Zoom link, whatever it is that you're using. That really removes the friction for candidates, and if you're not getting that from the recruiter, feel free to ask them that. I'm sure that they would just swap it out, and they'd be, they'd be happy to have that recommendation. Also, before you kick off the interview day, just a quick 5-minute check-in with the recruiter is really helpful. If that's not on your calendar, same Zoom link, just hop in there and kick off the day with them. Make sure that your technology is working, the Zoom link's working, or whatever it is that you're using. And then it's just nice to start the day with someone who's not an interviewer, because it kind of gets those initial jitters out. And then wrapping up the day too, I've been doing a quick 10 to 15 minutes with each candidate at the end of the day. That's really helpful for any questions that didn't get answered, but it's also great for asking about next steps, because you're not getting that human, face-to-face. Definitely you want to be able to close out the day with the recruiter.
Absolutely. These tidbits on being an advocate for yourself are incredibly important, especially when communication is a bit more fractured by not having that in-person touch. And you mentioned something that's important with regard to testing equipment, and you mentioned Wi-Fi connection. And I would say that you should absolutely be trying to jump into some kind of web call. And see if your mic and things like that are working ahead of time. Maybe ask a friend to hop in and listen to you on the other side of another computer. Aside from that, there are a couple of key connectivity guidelines that we follow here that, if you have access to, prove really important. While you're on a video call, you should try to close out every other application that you don't need open, because every single thing that you open up on your computer takes up processing power, and therefore throttles away from the power that your computer is putting towards screening you across both the internet and then someone else's technology. On that note, internet is only as fast as the speed of light, and so if you can connect your computer to a wired internet connection, that's another really important point. Ethernet is always faster than Wi-Fi. We've known it forever. And also, you want to limit interruptions as much as possible. Get into a space where you won't be expecting your 5-year-old to come knocking on the door. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that that newscast where that man's child came in through the door and his wife had to sort of pull the kid out. But you don't want that. It'll be laughed off, but also ideally, you just set yourself up so that doesn't happen. Anyone have anything to add on equipment? We have just over 5 minutes left.
Just one thought that I have is around creature comforts. Make sure you got yourself a cold drink, and hopefully your interviewers have built in some breaks if you're doing a series of panel interviews. But you want to make sure that you're thinking through those things in case, because they would have just automatically been taken care of in a face-to-face interview, and they might not have considered it. I think the other thing just to keep in mind is just take it seriously like you would any other interview. Just because it's a video interview doesn't mean that it's a second-class interview or that it's not as important. If you're going to invest the time in pursuing a new opportunity, then it's worth the time to prepare appropriately, just like you would for any other interview.
Absolutely. Prep is always super important. Check out our open source interview process for more on how we prepare folks. And that's all really great. We got through the first 4 topics, things like networking, what sort of research to do on a company when you're, going to Google for information, and thinking a bit about where the industry is today and how it might be in a completely different place tomorrow, and being prepared for that. We're going to wrap now on thinking about some of the questions you can ask your recruiter, potential manager, potential future colleagues. And these should be, harder questions because you really want to make sure you're doing due diligence. You get to the last stage in the interview process. You have 15 minutes with people sometimes to, pick their brains. What do you ask? Ashley,
I think that.
Oh, hey, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking back to something that was said earlier in the discussion. I think a couple folks on the team brought it up, but in terms of, are the companies adapting to what's going on here? And I think even asking them, like, how have things changed for your goals, for your hiring since this all started happening? And I'm a big believer that, if a company's not transparent with you in this process here, then they're not going to be, probably at any point. And so, just one, seeing if they're open about some of that. And I'm not saying they have to tell you their whole plan or, kind of open up the underneath the hood entirely, but they should be able to talk about, some of the changes that have been made. Or if they're not making changes, that would have me a little concerned as well. If they're just sort of business as usual, or pretending business as usual, I think that's something that I'd be wary of. And I don't think any of these are necessarily like deal breakers on their own, but just something as you're gathering information, like hear how they talk about it, if they're open about the changes, honest about the changes, things like that. So I think even just asking them very directly or about like how things have shifted in the last few weeks or month would be something that I'd ask about.
For me, I would qualify the opportunity, just like you would qualify a sales lead. So I would be asking questions like, is this a net new position or is this a backfill? If it's a backfill, maybe they see it as a more critical role than if it's new headcount. Maybe they don't, but, asking those types of questions. I would also, want to find out exactly, in their opinion, what's this interview process going to look like? What's the timeline going to be? And if they start deviating from those things, try to get an idea of, is that happening because the headcount is changing? And I would just ask the recruiter up front, like, hey, I'm going to be transparent with you. Can you please be transparent with me? I understand if changes happen, but I just want to know what's going on. And ask them for a regular information update. Set clear expectations with them of what you're looking for. And this is a unique situation for all of us. And sometimes we're going to be frustrated because we don't have information to get with you. But the one thing that we can all do is try to be extra communicative and make sure we're sharing what we know with candidates. And I think that's something we're going to do. That's something any great recruiter at a company is going to do to try to make your experience as easy as possible in this situation.
Great, thank you. And that's about a wrap for us. We are wrapping up, and I think we've got some meetings coming up for folks. But the moral of the story there, folks, is humans will be human and ask a lot of questions and prep for the interview. We're the Cockroach Labs Recruiting team. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
Bye now.